They locked her in a storage room because they didn't want her to audition for a major Hollywood film, until a billionaire walked in, fell for her at first sight, and pulled her out. And when she finally stepped in front of the camera, she got the role they tried to steal, and it drove them mad. Nina Carter stood in the glittering chaos of the Eaton Club's penthouse bar, the air thick with perfume and ambition. Her head throbbed from hours of forcing smiles and pouring drinks for investors who barely glanced at her. At the Eaton Club, as Nina poured champagne for a leering investor, Lacey glided into the room, her diamond earrings catching the light. "Oh, Nina," she called, loud enough for heads to turn. "Don't you get tired of playing servant, or is that just natural for you?" The room erupted in snickers, investors whispering about the fake heiress. Nina's hand tightened on the bottle, her face burning, but she kept her smile steady, pouring perfectly. Lacey leaned closer, her voice a venomous whisper. "Stay in your place, or I'll make sure you lose more than a job." Nina said nothing, her eyes locked on the floor, every laugh cutting deeper than a blade. She was 21, strikingly beautiful, with long dark hair and eyes that held a quiet fire, but tonight she felt invisible. The Carter Group, her biological family's empire, had demanded her presence to entertain their guests, and she'd played the part, as always, modest, composed, never begging for attention. But she needed air, a moment to breathe. In that moment, she remembered how she used to step outside her trailer in Missouri just to feel the cold bite her skin, to remind herself she was still alive. No cameras, no couture. Just silence, and the distant hum of the freeway. Back then, she'd read borrowed scripts under the flickering porch light, mouthing lines with hope in her throat and mud on her boots. No one believed in her dreams. Not her foster parents, not her teachers, not even the social worker who once told her, "Acting's a pipe dream, sweetheart." But she believed. And sometimes belief was all she had. That memory now grounded her more than the glittering skyline ever could. Slipping toward a quiet hallway, she nearly collided with Linda Storm, her manager at Starlight Entertainment. Linda's sharp eyes narrowed, her lips curling into a smile that didn't reach them. "Nina, going somewhere?" Nina steadied herself, her voice calm despite the pounding in her temples. "Just getting some air, Linda. Long night." Linda crossed her arms, her designer heels clicking against the marble floor. "Let's cut to it. I know you signed up to audition for Empire tomorrow. The lead role, you're not going." Nina's brow lifted slightly, her expression unshaken. She'd heard this before, Linda's endless attempts to box her out of big opportunities. "I wasn't aware my audition conflicted with anything. Why can't I go?" Linda's smile tightened. "Don't play coy. The Carter Group's already lined up Lacey for that role. You think you can just waltz in and steal it? They've sunk $15 million into this project, Nina. It's hers." Nina's lips curved faintly, not quite a smile. "If it's already hers, why are you so worried about me showing up?" Linda's face flushed, her voice dropping to a hiss. "You're an artist under my management. You do what I say, and I'm saying you're not going." "Funny," Nina said, her tone light but edged. "I didn't realize my career was supposed to be Lacey's shadow." Linda's eyes flashed with anger. "You ungrateful little—" "Don't test me, Nina. You'll regret it." Before Nina could respond, 2 security guards appeared, summoned by a flick of Linda's wrist. They grabbed her arms, their grips bruising, and shoved her toward a stairwell. As the guards seized Nina's arms, Linda stepped forward, her eyes glinting with malice. "You really thought you could sneak into that audition? You're nobody, Nina, a Missouri nobody with a fake name." She laughed, sharp and cold, as the guards yanked Nina's purse, spilling her script pages across the floor. "Look at this trash," Linda scoffed, grinding a page under her heel. "You're not an actress. You're a charity case the Carters pity." Nina's jaw clenched, but she didn't speak, her silence louder than any protest as they shoved her toward the stairwell. She didn't scream, didn't fight, just let her gaze burn into Linda's as they dragged her up to the rooftop. But inside, her blood surged with fury. She wanted to scream, to rip off her heels and throw them at every smug face in that club, to drag Linda across the marble floors and make her choke on her smug little power trip. But she wouldn't give them the satisfaction. She wouldn't crack. Not now. Rage had never served her before. What had served her was patience, silence, and the long game. She would remember this night. She would remember every sneer, every insult, every hand that pushed her. And one day, when they all looked up at a billboard with her face on it, she wanted them to remember it too. Her phone was snatched from her pocket, and with a final push, she stumbled into a cramped storage room. The door slammed shut, the lock clicking with finality. Darkness swallowed her. The air was stale, the space barely big enough to turn around. Nina slid down the wall, her simple black dress catching on the rough floor. She didn't cry or shout. She sat in silence, her face composed, her mind racing. She counted seconds, then minutes, tracing them with her breath. The longer she sat, the more her fury crystallized. Not a storm, but ice, cold, controlled. She'd learned long ago that screaming did nothing. You had to be quiet to survive. Her hands, resting on her knees, tightened into fists as her mind turned over Linda's words. A charity case, that's what they thought she was. But she wasn't begging. She never had. Everything she'd done, every line she memorized, every audition she was denied, was building toward this. If they wanted war, they'd get one. But it wouldn't come with fire. It would come in silence, with her name on every marquee they tried to keep her from. In the dark storage room, Nina's mind drifted to her first night at the Carter estate 5 years ago. She'd stood in their marble foyer, 16 and hopeful, clutching a worn suitcase. Her mother, Evelyn Carter, had barely looked at her. "You're not our daughter," she'd said coldly, while her father, Richard, muttered about bad blood. Lacey, watching from the staircase, had smiled, a predator's grin, as the family turned away. That night, alone in a guest room, Nina overheard them planning to manage her, to keep her out of their world. The memory stung worse than the cold biting her skin now. This wasn't new. Lacey Dalton, the girl who'd stolen her life, had been pulling strings to crush her since the truth came out. 5 years ago, a car accident and a DNA test had exposed the switch at birth. Nina, the true Carter heiress, had been raised in a Missouri trailer, beaten down by a family who sensed she didn't fit. Lacey, meanwhile, had grown up in the Carter mansion, draped in wealth and adoration. When Nina returned to New York, the Carters didn't embrace her. They mourned Lacey's lost status, treating Nina like an interloper. Lacey, sweet-faced and vicious, played the victim to perfection, using her media connections to paint Nina as a gold-digging fraud. Every step Nina took, Lacey was there to trip her. This audition for Empire was Nina's shot, a blockbuster war epic directed by Quentin Hale, a legend. She hadn't told anyone how much this role meant to her. This was the one that kept her up at night, whispering lines under her breath as she reheated ramen at 2 a.m. It was the kind of script you only get once, a character layered in pain, betrayal, and buried strength. She saw herself in Marla, the exile, the scapegoat, the one history would try to erase. Nina didn't want the fame, not really. What she wanted was for someone, somewhere, to say, "I see you, I believe you." And this was her shot to be seen. She'd spent months studying the script, losing herself in the character of General Marla, a war hero betrayed and exiled. The lead role, Empress Kalia, was what everyone chased, but Nina knew Marla was hers. She'd poured her heart into preparing, memorizing every line, every pause. And now, locked in this freezing box, she felt that dream slipping away. Hours passed. Her breath fogged in the chilly air, but she didn't move, didn't let despair win. She thought of Missouri, of nights hiding from her foster father's rage, whispering to herself that she'd escape. She'd survived worse than this. A faint sound broke her thoughts, footsteps, heavy and deliberate. The lock clicked and the door creaked open. A tall figure stood against the city lights, his face shadowed. "You okay?" His voice was low, steady, not laced with pity. Nina rose smoothly, brushing dust from her dress. "I've had better nights." He stepped closer, and she saw him clearly. Sharp jawline, dark hair, eyes that seemed to see through her defenses. Lucas King, CEO of the King Group, a 28-year-old billionaire who'd built a tech empire from nothing. He was media shy, famously private, and avoided Hollywood like the plague. Yet here he was, staring at her with an intensity that wasn't flirtation. It was recognition, like he saw the strength she kept hidden. "I was checking the rooftop for a signal," he said, gesturing to his phone. "Heard something up here. Didn't expect this." He glanced at the storage room, his jaw tightening. "Who did this?" "Doesn't matter," Nina said, her voice even. "I need to get to an audition. It's probably over, but I have to try." Lucas studied her, then nodded. "Where?" Sunset Studios, downtown. He didn't hesitate. Let's go. They took his car, a sleek black sedan that cut through Manhattan's traffic like a blade. Lucas drove in silence, glancing at her occasionally. You're not what I expected, he said finally. Nina's lips quirked. What's that supposed to mean? You're not screaming or crying after being locked up all night. Most people would be. I'm not most people, she said simply. He gave a small nod, like he'd filed that away. What's the audition? Empire. It's a war film. I'm reading for General Marla. Not the lead? He asked, surprised. Everyone wants the lead, she said. Marla's the one who matters to me. He didn't press, and she appreciated it. Lucas King wasn't here to save her out of pity. He was intrigued, maybe even impressed by the way she carried herself. She wasn't a damsel, and he wasn't a knight. They were just two people crossing paths at the right moment. They reached Sunset Studios at dawn, the lot buzzing with crew members breaking down equipment. Lucas parked the car in a red zone, ignoring the tow signs. Wait here, he said, stepping out and flashing his ID to a confused security guard. Moments later, the gate rolled open. No one questioned him. His name carried weight, and money erased doubt. As Nina walked past the checkpoint, she noticed how heads turned toward Lucas more than toward her. It used to sting, being the shadow behind a man's power. But not this time. Lucas wasn't her savior. He'd opened a door, yes, but she'd walked through it, and that distinction mattered more than anyone could know. Nina's heart sank. The audition was over. She stepped out, her plain dress and unstyled hair drawing stares from the polished assistants. Whispers followed her. Who's she? Another wannabe? Look at her clothes. Lucas stayed by the car, watching her walk toward the studio doors. You've got this, he called, his voice carrying a quiet certainty. She gave him a nod, then pushed inside. The lobby was nearly empty, save for a cluster of people near the audition room. Quentin Hale, the director, Sarah Lynn, the screenwriter, and a few producers. They turned as Nina approached, their faces a mix of annoyance and curiosity. She looked out of place, her dress wrinkled, her face bare of makeup. The whispers grew louder. She's late. Why's she even here? I'm sorry, Nina said, bowing her head slightly, her voice clear. I know I'm late. I'm Nina Carter, here for Empire. I'd like to read for General Marla, if you'll let me. Quentin, a wiry man with sharp eyes, frowned. Auditions ended an hour ago. We've already seen everyone. I understand, Nina said, her posture straight, her gaze unwavering. But I've prepared for this role. I won't waste your time. Sarah Lynn tilted her head, intrigued. Marla, huh? Not Kalia, the Empress? No, Nina said. Marla's who I came for. The room went quiet. A producer muttered, She's the Carter girl from the tabloids, the fraud one. Quentin shot him a look, then sighed. Fine, one read. Don't expect miracles. They led her to the audition room, a stark space with a camera and a single chair. The crew watched, arms crossed, expecting a quick failure. As Nina entered the audition room, a lighting tech snorted loudly. What's this? Thrift store princess thinks she's a star? The crew laughed, one mimicking her walk and her plain dress. Bet she's here to beg for scraps, another whispered, loud enough for her to hear. Nina's cheeks flushed, but she lifted her chin, her eyes steady as she faced the camera. Their jeers echoed the tabloid's lies. Fraud, nobody, fake, each word a needle in her pride. Yet she stood taller, her silence daring them to see her truth. Nina stood under the lights, her simple dress suddenly seeming regal in its simplicity. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting Marla's pain and defiance flood her. The scene was Marla's trial, where she's accused of treason. Nina began, her voice low but resonant. You call me a traitor, but I fought for this land when you hid behind your walls. You'll take my title, my honor, but you'll never take my truth. Her eyes blazed, not with anger, but with unshakable conviction. She moved subtly, her hands trembling just enough to show Marla's vulnerability, her chin lifting to show her strength. The room was silent. Quentin leaned forward, his pen frozen mid-air. Sarah's mouth parted slightly, her notebook forgotten. Nina finished the scene, her final line a quiet, piercing vow. I'll rise again, and you'll remember my name. For 5 seconds, no one spoke. As Nina finished Marla's final line, the room felt smaller, the air charged with her presence. She wasn't just acting, she was Marla, her pain and defiance so real that a grip dropped his coffee, the splash unnoticed. And in those moments, Nina wasn't just proving she belonged. She was reclaiming everything they tried to take. Her voice, stolen by rumors. Her image, smeared by tabloids. Her future, locked behind doors she was never meant to open. As the last word fell from her lips, it was more than a line. It was a resurrection. The girl they tried to erase stood in full view, commanding a room filled with doubters. For the first time in years, Nina didn't feel small. She felt seen, and they, every one of them, would remember what it felt like to underestimate her. Quentin's eyes glistened. Sarah scribbled furiously, and even the snickering Tech stood frozen, mouths agape. Nina lowered her gaze, modest as ever, but her performance lingered like a spell, proving every doubter wrong in one breathtaking moment. The silence broke with Quentin's hoarse whisper, "That's not talent. That's a miracle." Then Sarah clapped once, sharply breaking the spell. "Holy, that was Marla," she said, turning to Quentin. "That's her." Quentin rubbed his jaw, stunned. "Nina, where'd you learn to do that?" "I didn't," Nina said softly. "I just felt her." The crew exchanged glances, their skepticism gone. A producer whispered, "She's better than anyone we saw for Kalia." Quentin stood, walking over to her. "I saw a student film you did years ago, small thing out of Missouri. I should have followed up, but your press, the rumors, I didn't. That was my mistake." Nina met his gaze, her expression calm. "I'm here now." He nodded, a slow smile breaking through. "You're Marla. We'll call you with details." "Thank you," Nina said, bowing her head again, her voice steady but her heart racing. She'd done it. Against every odd, every trap, she'd claimed the role she'd bled for. As she left the studio, the morning sun hit her face, and she felt lighter than she had in years. Lucas was gone, his car no longer in the lot, but she didn't mind. He'd given her a chance, not a debt. She'd earned this herself. Word spread fast. By noon, Lacey Dalton was spiraling. Lacey's tantrum was volcanic. She smashed a crystal decanter against the floor of her penthouse suite, red wine splattering the white marble like blood. "She was supposed to be locked in," she screamed, her voice ragged. "She was supposed to disappear." Her assistant cowered by the door, silent, afraid to move. Lacey paced in circles, her designer heels clicking like gunshots. She had prepared for this role for months, or at least prepared to walk in and charm her way through it. And now the headlines were praising Nina for stealing the show. Stealing her spotlight. Lacey's throat burned with rage. She wants war. She's going to get it. She'd been at the studio earlier, all charm and confidence, certain she'd locked down Empress Kalia. Her team had leaked stories to the press, hyping her as the Carter heiress destined for stardom. When she heard Nina had auditioned and booked Marla, she froze, her perfect smile cracking. Later that day, as Nina left the studio, Lacey was already on the phone with a tabloid editor, her voice syrupy with fake tears. "I just feel so betrayed," she lied, pacing her penthouse. "Nina's spreading rumors that I stole her life. I grew up a Carter. She's just jealous." The editor ate it up, promising a front-page hit piece, heiress or con artist. Nina Carter's lies exposed. Lacey hung up, smiling at her reflection. She'd bury Nina before she could shine, and the world would cheer her for it. Nina, oblivious, walked home alone, her victory still fragile. As she turned the final corner to her apartment building, Nina glanced up at the gray skyline. The world hadn't changed. Traffic still rumbled. Lights still blinked red and green. But something in her had shifted. She wasn't the girl they shoved in a storage closet anymore. She was the woman who walked back out. She thought of Lucas, of his quiet support. She didn't know what his role in her life would become, if anything at all. But in that moment, she felt less alone. She walked a little taller, her shoes echoing with certainty against the pavement. For the first time, her steps felt like they belonged to someone unafraid. She called Linda, her voice venomous. "You said she wouldn't show up. You promised me." Linda stammered. "I locked her in. I swear, someone must have—" "I don't care," Lacey snapped. "She's nobody. A farm girl playing dress-up. Fix this, Linda. Make her disappear." Linda tried to calm her. "It's just a supporting role, Lacey. Kalia's the star. You'll outshine her." But Lacey wasn't listening. Nina's win, however small, felt like a theft. She'd spent years burying Nina, ensuring every headline called her a liar, a nobody. And now Nina had slipped through, her talent undeniable. Lacey opened her phone, dialing her publicist. "I want dirt on her. Anything. Make it ugly." Across town, Nina sat in her tiny apartment, rereading the Empire script. She didn't know about Lacey's plans, but she felt the weight of what was coming. The Carters would never let her rise easily. Lacey would fight dirtier than ever. But for the first time, Nina wasn't afraid. She'd faced the dark, the cold, the lies, and she was still standing. Lucas King, meanwhile, was back at his office, staring out at the skyline. Later that night, he found himself watching a grainy clip of Nina from 5 years ago, a local theater production. Low lighting, wobbly camera. But her performance? Electric. There was something raw in the way she delivered each line, like she wasn't just playing a part, she was surviving it. The audience had been small, but the silence that followed her final monologue had been the kind of hush that lives in reverence. Lucas replayed that moment 3 times. He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his jaw, then murmured to himself, "They buried a diamond and called it dust." And for the first time in a long while, he felt something that wasn't strategy or profit, it was admiration. He didn't know why Nina Carter lingered in his mind, her quiet strength, the way she hadn't flinched in that storage room. He wasn't a man who chased feelings, but he found himself searching her name online. The headlines were brutal. Carter fraud exposed. Gold digger or lost heiress. Yet he'd seen her, raw and real, and he knew the truth was bigger than the lies. He closed his laptop, a decision settling in. Lucas leaned back in his chair, eyes unfocused. He'd spent years in rooms where silence was a threat, a negotiation tactic, a sign of retreat. But Nina's silence was different. It wasn't weakness, it was control. It was strength wrapped in stillness. And that made her dangerous in a world that thrived on noise. He thought of his next board meeting, of the endless faces that smiled too wide and meant nothing. Then he thought of her, standing beneath those harsh audition lights, unblinking. The world would try to chew her up, spit her out. But Lucas wasn't convinced it could. Something told him Nina Carter wouldn't just survive. She'd redefine what survival looked like. He'd keep an eye on her, not to save her, but to see what she'd do next. Because Nina Carter wasn't just surviving, she was rewriting the game. And this was only the beginning. What came after would change everything. Reputations shattered, loyalties tested, and the world forced to see a woman they had overlooked in an entirely different light. So if this story stirred something in you, if you felt the injustice, if you held your breath when she rose, if you whispered, "Good for her," when they finally realized who she was, then don't just walk away. Tap like to show you believe in second chances. Comment to let your voice be heard. Subscribe to join a growing community who sees the value in quiet strength. And most importantly, share this story. Because you never know who's out there, needing a reminder that dignity wears many faces. Part 2 is coming, and trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next.